Okay, welcome back to another episode of The Millennial Entrepreneur. My name is Sina and I love following the journeys of other young entrepreneurs. And in this episode, I'm really excited because I spoke with Sophie Taylor, the founder of Sophie's Iced Nut Blend, a nut-based iced coffee brand. We talk about her journey from working in a cafe at the age of 17 and creating a new nut-based iced coffee to selling it to other cafes in the area to then creating a brand around herself and then now set to launch her amazing nut-based iced coffee brand in a well-known supermarket very soon. And we talk about the whole process of how she went from an idea to a product and then ultimately selling it in a supermarket. We also talk about how and why she decided to transition to retail after finding a lot of success from her direct-to-consumer sales channels, and also talk about a deal that fell through and the awful reason why she thinks it did. It was a really interesting chat with Sophie and I absolutely loved it. I learned a lot and it's our second food business that we've had on the podcast before. We spoke with Potion Universe before, an alcoholic drinks brand, and that was really valuable. And if you haven't listened to that before, be sure to listen to that before you listen to this one because they're both equally as enjoyable. And so that takes me to this week's shout out. So in case you don't know, every week I'm giving a shout out to someone who's left a written review on Apple Podcasts just to show, I appreciate you guys and just to share the love basically. And this week's shout out goes to The Goonery, who basically says, "This helps me as a young confused millennial stay focused and motivated to live my best life." Well, that's what I set up the podcast to do, to basically inspire and motivate other, millennials out there. And so I love reading messages like that and, big shout out to you. If you want to feature in the next episode as well for a shout out, be sure to leave a written review with your name. The Goonery, I think they follow me on Instagram, so I know who they are. They're a page. But yeah, leave your name you want me to refer to you as, and I'll give you a shout out in the next episode. And follow the page on Instagram because that's where all the new episodes get announced, all the previews, all the audiograms, all of that good stuff, along with other cool announcements that I've made in the past that you might have missed because you haven't followed the Instagram. So yeah, be sure to follow us on there. And without further ado, let's get on with the amazing episode this week. Okay, hey Sophie, how you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. Excited to talk to you today.
I know, yes. You've been on my radar for quite a while as a guest that I wanted to have on, so I'm really excited to finally have you on.
Oh, perfect.
After I saw you on Scott's podcast, sorry, not Scott, after I saw you on Ted's podcast, there's quite a lot of podcasts in my Instagram, I get mixed up between them. But yeah, so I listened to that and you're really interesting, so I was like, yeah, I need to get her on, especially because
Thank you.
after I had someone on the podcast previously who created a food brand, and I really learnt a lot and I really wanted to get more sort of food brands on the podcast. So I wanted to get more food brands on the podcast. So that's why I thought, reach out to you, because the one before was a alcoholic brand. So we're moving from alcohol to milk or like nut milk.
Yeah, and I actually I listened to that episode as well. So I suppose it's good to there's all within food and drink, especially food and drink business and the process and everything. It's all really different and really precise to each product. So I suppose it's good to have a range of food products to listen to.
Yeah, exactly. And I know a lot of people, because we've had a lot of sort of tech businesses on the podcast before, but there's food brands I thought would be really cool to get on. And so, yeah, why don't you just kind of start off by what is Sophie's Iced Nut Blend and where did it start? Where did it all come from?
So Sophie's Iced Nut Blend is a hazelnut and coconut flavoured iced coffee. So it's made with nut milks and it's vegan, dairy-free and gluten-free. So the idea, I started the business when I was 17, so 4 years ago now. And the idea came from when I was working part-time in a coffee shop, and I came into contact with their iced coffees and I absolutely loved them. But no one else really seemed to be interested. And I think the reason behind that, from what I heard from customers, was just the fact that they thought it was really high in sugar, really high in fat, and genuinely just not very good for you. So I thought, if this is the only thing that's putting people off what I thought was an amazing product, then if I can add something healthy to something that seemed to be unhealthy, I could fill a gap in the market. So that's basically what I did. And at the time, it was called Malheur Coffee. So I just made them up in a fresh cup form, and I was selling them in cafes and restaurants. And then I decided that I wanted to bottle it because the demand just got too much. So then I started that process of getting it into bottles from cup form. And then recently we decided to rebrand and go from selling into the kind of cafe retro style restaurants to now selling in retail. So it was a massive change and a really, really big risk for the business, but it's one that's definitely paid off and is paying off.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. And I actually want to take a step back because that all sounds like really, really interesting, but I want to drill down into one part of it. So you had the idea for, you really wanted to make an iced coffee sort of product. And you're actually right. Like during exam season, I'm not a big coffee drinker, but during exam season, I would have a lot of the sort of, like, the Starbucks sort of iced coffees, like the chilled ones in the
Yeah, like the
supermarkets.
frappes, yeah.
Yeah, they're actually so nice. But anyway, they're really, really high in like sugar and fat. And I was quite apprehensive of this, but obviously, like during exam season, you don't really care about that sort of thing. So yeah, but like right now, I wouldn't drink that sort of thing because, health reasons. So yeah, it definitely like fills a gap there. But how did you go from sort of the idea of wanting to make something into an actual like product? Because so did you first sort of experiment with different recipes and then kind of yeah, so how was the whole process from there?
So because I worked in the coffee shop at the time, um, I kind of knew how they made their iced coffee, so I knew what tasted good. And then I kind of just, I suppose, got thrown into it. So I started just making them up in like in the fresh cut form, just a recipe that I'd I suppose tried in the kitchen, and I suppose that's what I did. I just went back and forth with different recipes in my kitchen. But I mean, everyone that I tried tasted good, so it was quite easy to do that. And then so I was in fresh cut form and I really loved the way that everything looked. And then I just started selling to cafes. So I literally just went into cafes and just was like, will you sell this? I got flyers and leaflets and everything made up. And I just genuinely just walked around into every cafe that I knew and just asked them to sell it.
What is I don't know if this was a stupid question or not, but whatever. What is fresh cut form? What do you mean by that?
Oh, so I'm so used to saying it that I just say it automatically.
You're using technical coffee terms that I don't know about.
So So exactly like what you said. So when you had the frappes from Starbucks, it's in those kind of clear plastic cups with a dome lid and then a straw, rather than being in like a bottle or a closed container. So it's very fresh. So I'd have to go to the cafes. And I just passed my sorry, no, I haven't even passed my driving test at this point. So I was 17 and I was just walking around with like heavy heavy ingredients in my bag, just walking around to like all the cafes, and I would just have to make them up before they opened. So it got quite tiring quite quickly, and then that's when I decided to get into bottles because the demand as well was just too much. It wasn't going to be able to upscale.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds really interesting. So the sort of demand was pretty good. Like people, the cafe owners were really liking it and they were selling them.
Yeah, and this is something that I would say as well. Like, I'm not a massive. Obviously when I first started, I just started. I had the idea, and you kind of sometimes you can get really excited, and then more people want to sell it, and you're like, oh, okay, I'll sell in here, I'll sell everywhere. But I would just say like try and have a plan. Even if it's not exact, just have like a kind of flow chart of what you're going to do at each stage, because when they started selling out very quickly, I basically couldn't do it. It wasn't possible. So I had to stop selling for a little bit whilst I then got it into like bottles. And so I just think have a plan of what you're doing, so you know how to upscale. So yeah, that's definitely something that I would recommend.
Yeah, because I know a lot of people listening would like they have probably thought about a food, creating their own food brand around things that they really enjoy eating. So would you sort of recommend in the first early stages just kind of trying to make the whole recipe yourself in your own like home, or in your case I guess the place where you were working, but kind of somewhere close to you before like rolling out, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I really struggled with was when I then went into bottles. There's so many, especially if you're using anything to do with allergens. With food and drink, there's so many hurdles you need to go to just get the label sorted. And obviously, it depends on what product it is. Mine was very complicated at the start. So it's really, that's the main hurdle I think when you're starting, is actually food and drink takes a lot of development in terms of the legalities before you sell it. Um, so when there are certain laws, I can't remember exactly because it's been a while since I've had to touch anything to do with labelling, but there are some laws where I think if you sell within a certain mile radius towards your home, you don't have to put certain things on the label, but it's easier to label basically if you make from home and sell quite close to where you live. And also it's easier to cope with as well if you need to, restock or something. So definitely start small and then build up from there. Start small, test the concept, and then build up from there.
Yeah, definitely. Really good advice. How did you go from the stage of like, okay, so you created a recipe that you and the cafe owners and everyone else absolutely loved. I actually really want to try it now. It sounds it sounds pretty amazing. I haven't tried.
I'll send you some.
But yeah, so you went from that and then the demand was like crazy. So obviously you had to scale it somehow and that was to the bottles. How was that process like? What did that look like? And like, was it easy? Like, how? I'm just trying to think because it's quite a systematic process, but it sounds like each sort of process does take a lot of time
Yeah.
and sort of a learning curve for each sort of step.
Yeah, see, this was the most difficult part for me because this took the longest amount of time, and it's just crazy because when you look at like a bottle, you don't realize how much goes into it and just how difficult it is. So the process for me, the main issue that I had was labeling laws, because obviously mine was a nut milk product. So the main issue that I had was the labeling side of things. So I don't know how to really provide advice on that. I suppose you just have to do a lot of recipe development so that you get the simplest, easiest recipe with the just an easy recipe that you can use basically, because that's going to make your labeling a lot easier. And try look into like the allergens. I'd say if you're going to do like a food and drink product, just try and do something that's already on the market so that you can essentially kind of copy someone in a way. For your first food and drink business, don't try and do something too unique because then you have so many issues. Um, so yeah, I think just getting into bottles, is the main issue you're going to come across is the labelling laws, food and hygiene ratings, all that. It does take a lot of time, and that can sometimes be really frustrating. And for me, it honestly took ages. So yeah, just try and start off as small as you can, I'd say.
But what sort of problems are there? Well, because it's a nut milk brand, so obviously there's people with nut allergies. Is that the main sort of problem you're talking about?
Yeah, so it's allergens. It's also the certain ingredients I was using at the time were kind of like difficult to list. It's kind of difficult to explain. There was just so many problems, and also it's there's certain jargon, I suppose, that you have to use on the label, which if you've got certain percentages of this or certain percentages of that, or it's not enough percentage of this particular ingredient, you can't list it on the label at all. So that's problems that I had. And I had at the time I had a very fixed idea of how I wanted everything to look and how I wanted it to be and what I wanted it to be called. And it basically just didn't align with what I was being advised to do, in terms of labeling. So I really struggled with labeling. But again, it's other people's. Other people might have a very kind of simple idea, and it might not take that long at all.
Yeah, there does seem to be a lot of sort of hoops you got to jump through for stuff like that because there is a lot of like legal sort of barriers, I guess, and sort of health and safety stuff.
Yeah, if you stay away from anything that's got any allergens in it, it's going to be a lot easier for you. So anything that's like, so for example, like fruit juices, things like that, they're pretty much easy to get straight on the market. And then once the product's on the market, then you can like change it and edit it and make changes. But I think just to get on the market as quickly as possible, have the simplest idea, the simplest product, and something that's already been done, and then just add something unique to it, so to make it unique.
Yeah. When you talk about getting into bottles, is that the whole like finding a manufacturer? Is that the whole manufacturing process that you're talking about?
At that stage, I again was just making it from home, and then I was so I was making it from home, and then I was just like, taking it to the cafes myself. Later on, I then went into manufacturing, which again, because my product was nut based, it's very difficult to find factories that don't. Um, so basically, when you have anything to do with allergens, the factory can't have. So if you're having like making a free from product, for example, the factory has to just be a free from factory. It can't then suddenly start making all these weird and and a lot of factories, especially in the UK, a lot of factories will they won't want to do it unless you're at a certain minimum order quantity. So the main issue that you have, there's like a gap. So when you first, when you're selling and you're doing really well at home, you're making it at home, you're doing well, and then you kind of get to the point where you're like, okay, it's selling out, I need to kind of get into the factory. There's a massive gap between your numbers when you're selling out, making it from home, and when you then purchase it from a manufacturer. So there's that big gap, where that's your main hurdle, I think, in terms of when you're doing manufacturing and going to that next step, is there's a difference between the numbers that you do when you're just you can't do it anymore from home, and then when you're in a factory they've got very high minimum order quantities, so that's another problem that you do encounter as well. But again, the simpler the product is, the more it's done, the more likely you'll be able to find a manufacturer who can do it, and then once you build and build and build, then you can make your product more unique further down the line.
From talking to Sophie, it seemed like the best way to start your own food brand initially is to start from your own actually home kitchen, obviously complying with all the health and safety regulations and all of that good stuff. But it seemed like the best way to actually start a food brand. So I wanted to ask her, what's the longevity and like how would be the best way to start in your own home? And also, should you carry on for as long as possible to see, before you hit scaling problems?
Honestly, even very successful brands, I'm trying to think of, I mean, obviously I'm talking about within my industry, so I'm talking about the free from vegan industry, where it is quite difficult anyway, because factories just don't want to do it, because if they can get an order from another company and they don't have to do a massive 4 or 5 hour clean down after, they're going to take that contract over yours. But even people who I know that are really successful now within this industry, and specifically nuts, it took them, some of them take at least 2 years to find a manufacturer. And with me, I've had a lot of manufacturers who have promised and then not delivered, and sometimes it's been just before I'm about to launch into a retailer. So it can be difficult, which is why I just say plan everything before, so at least you know what numbers you have to be doing before you move to this stage and that stage and that stage. So yeah, if you have a plan, I think you'll be fine.
So what was that process like? Was it literally just emailing as many different manufacturers as possible to see,
I do, yeah.
basically to see what they would say?
Yeah. So you basically just have to, yeah, like you said, email, Google, contact people, ask other people who I mean, people never give out their manufacturers ever. It's like one of those things that people just don't ever give out. But yeah, it's just a case of speaking to people and Googling and asking people, and asking what their minimum order quantities are, and then what you need to do is, you then, depending on the recipe that you've developed at home, when you move from making it at home, there's certain changes that they have to then make to the recipe to make it more commercially viable. So obviously that might then mean that you don't get the exact product that you want, or the exact product that it was before, or the exact product that your customer likes.
Yeah.
And sometimes that is just something that you have to bear. And I do also think it's worth keeping in mind, especially when it comes to that, the fact that you do have to make certain changes and you might not like it. Sometimes people do genuinely make, I mean, this is kind of a reason why I stuck to doing it in cafes and restaurants, things like that, because I had a lot more control. I could just hire delivery drivers to go out, deliver it to the outlets, and I was in control. So I think you do have that kind of, there's two ways to look at it. You can do it online as a massive market and through cafes and things like that, or you can do it through retail, but I think they can sometimes be equally as profitable as each other. And sometimes it is easier and more beneficial to do it from home, but also have a process where you can make larger quantities from home, which you can do, and do it down that route. Because I know companies, I can't remember the exact, there's a company as well who I'm in contact with, who's a drinks company. I think they do a lot, they have vitamins in their drinks, and they are purely online, and they advertise on TV. You know, they're really big, and all of their sales have always been through online, and then that way they don't have to give away margins. They literally have 100% of the profit to them to reinvest in their business, and they can sometimes grow at twice or third the amount, the third rate than you can if you're having to give away margins. So it's not a case of, you know, it depends what's right for your business and your product in terms of how you sell it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like that channel, that route is like a lot better to go down, but it's just the whole volumes won't be as high as if you go down the whole retail or say like Amazon or whatever. Like it won't be as high, I guess. That's why like direct to consumer is way, you know, the profit margins on direct to consumer are way higher, but you won't get as much volume, and your brand, I suppose, won't be as seen as often.
I honestly think when you sell, because you're keeping 100% of the profits when you're selling direct to
Yeah.
consumers, sometimes you can sell a lower volume, but you can make just as much. I understand what you're saying in terms of getting your brand out there, but I think then you also have a lot more control over the way your brand is perceived,
Yeah, you're 100% right.
when you do make it from home. There's definitely like two sides. I think it's definitely worth weighing up, and not always. I think everyone looks at retail and is like, oh my god, that's exactly where I want to be. But when you look into certain things like profit margins and the process and logistics and things like that, sometimes it is easier to have that control and to make it from home or from another workspace.
So what's your thought process with this at the moment? Because we'll talk about this in a second, but you're set to launch in a retailer very soon. But obviously, like you have the direct consumer channel as well. So what are your sort of like thought processes with them being there?
So yeah, so for 4 years I had a model that basically really worked. I liked my profits. I liked what I'd done day to day. Again, I was in control of everything, and I had customers which I'd sold for, cafes, restaurants, things like that. I'd sold with them for years. I had that. I suppose I had that, brand value there because people knew the brand in that kind of space. And I had been thinking about going into retail before, and I kind of went in and out of trying to make that happen. But again, because I had so many issues with manufacturing and things like that, um, it just seemed better to stick with that. But then, I think I just got to a point where I was thinking, okay, where do I want this brand to go myself? And I had a few conversations with people, and I just decided that I had to take that risk and see if I could do it in retail. And I also around that time I developed the product. So I changed the product slightly. I rebranded because I had a really big opportunity, basically I had a really big opportunity with a company, and they were going to, um, in a way, develop my product for me in under the Sophie's Ice Nut Blend brand, and they were going to sell it into retail for me as part of their range. So I worked really, really hard to get this deal, and it's my dream deal. And all the Sophie's Ice Nut Blend branding was made specifically for this deal. And then basically it fell through. So that was really, really hard. And then I already had the new branding there, and I absolutely loved it. And it was just suited to retail, and I'd been thinking about retail, and then I just made a decision to just do it and take that risk.
Yeah.
And it has paid off. But I'm happy I definitely made that decision. It has paid off, and I think, where I'm 21 as well, I kind of knew that I wanted to do that, and I thought if I don't do it now, when am I going to? And again, with COVID, I'm glad I'd done that because a lot of the cafes shut down. Everything's changing in terms of
Yeah.
terms of the retail space. So I'm definitely glad I made that decision. But I suppose it was that deal that didn't go through that made me kind of go, okay, I definitely want to do this.
That's really interesting. So was it that deal? Firstly, I've never actually heard of a deal like that, so it'd be good to get a bit of context about that. But also, like,
Mm.
was it that deal and the introduction of that made you sort of firstly concentrate on retail, but also concentrate on your branding? And was that the shifting point and the sort of turning point of you going from a sort of a brand around your actual personal image?
Yeah. So I think when it was Malheur Coffee, it was brilliant for cafes. It's very retro style looking. It's very kind of it was a lovely brand, and I was very attached to it because I'd done it for so long, and it meant so much to me. I was really attached to the branding, and I think in every other situation, you know, in business, when people give you advice or constructive criticism, you have to kind of think about it and take what you want from it. But the one thing that I would not listen to would be if someone like said anything about my branding. I just would not listen to it. And the branding was lovely, but it just wasn't it wasn't like crazy eye catching. And when you go into retail, it needs to really jump off the shelf. Like it needs to be like so unique that when people look at, you know, loads and loads of bottles on the shelf, their eyes go to your product. And it wasn't like that with Malheur Coffee. That was very retro style, cafe style, where I had less on the shelf in that cafe, so I had less competition. So I think it was that deal that made me realise that I wanted to do retail. It was that deal that made me realise that my product could do really well in retail. I'd obviously thought about it before, but I think that was the turning point to make me just take that risk. But also, like, because it was something I wanted to do for a while, it was also the fact that I was like, if I don't do it now, when am I going to do it? And then it did work out. So yeah, I think that was probably the turning point, though.
What was that sort of deal? So this random company was going to, like, how would that have worked?
So like I'm just incredibly like hardworking, like I always have been. So it's not like a deal that's like a standard structure. It's not a deal that it's not a standard thing basically. So I again knew before that I wanted to go into retail, but I loved my business model. So I was like, if there's another way that I could help a company to basically that isn't in the dairy free market yet, and they're going into the dairy. If I can give them a because it was a growing trend, if I could give them a product that was tried and tested and had all this amazing reviews, all this great feedback, and these really high sales, and we would basically do it on a collaboration basis, so like a percentage basis, and I would actually have got a lower percent, but it would have got it into retail.
Yeah.
So it's essentially like selling the rights to your product, I suppose. So I genuinely just started contacting all of these like big companies. So I I just kind of guessed people's email addresses. And I kind of had the idea that if I could get in front of these people, then I could then pitch my idea to them. So I had meetings with the head of the manager director of Cafe Nero, of lots of different coffee companies, like big companies. Trying to think who else now. Who else I speak to? Up and Go, Plenish, loads and loads of different big companies. And I basically just went in there and was like, this is what I'm pitching to you. Like, this is going to help you to enter this new space of the dairy free market. Um, and I'm going to help you do that. And it's done and dusted for you. Here's all the proven sales, you know. So I'd done that. And then this one company that was it's really big. I don't know if I can't remember. I think I did sign a confidentiality agreement. I'm not sure if it's still valid now because obviously it didn't go through. But I signed an agreement, so I'm not sure that I should say who it is. But yes, I signed. So I spoke with this company, the managing director, and she really loved the idea. And she was like, "I'm not promising you anything, but I will speak to my global team and see what they think." So I had all this branding made up, which is now the Sophie's Ice Nut Blend branding. And yeah, they were thinking about going to Nut Mills, but they hadn't made that change yet. So it was a perfect company. Um, and I had all the brand made up, put together a massive presentation, and then it went back and forth for ages, and I genuinely, hand on heart, the way that it was said to me, the
Yeah.
way that it was kind of promised to me, I genuinely believed the deal was going to go ahead. Um, and I don't get my hopes up easily, because people do kind of say things and then it doesn't happen, or things don't materialise. I never get my hopes up easily, but I, hand on heart, honestly believe that was going to happen. And then it fell through, and the response that I got was, from there. Bearing in mind the global team had already certified it, so it wasn't like it was like a pipe dream. They'd certified it. So all I thought at the time, it just needs to go through. That's what I thought. And then I got a response saying, "Oh, we think this is adorable. We think she's adorable." And then I kind of thought, is it a bit? Are they patronising me a little bit? Is it an age thing?
Adorable.
Yeah, adore. It was the word. It was like adorable, and it was the way. Obviously, it was the way that it was said to me as well, like, adorable. And I just kind of thought, it just
That's so
frustrated me a
fucking
lot.
patronizing.
Do you know what? I feel like I've got to be so careful, because like, sometimes people say, "Oh, but it might not be," and of course it may not be that, of course not. But the way that it was said to me, that's exactly how I felt, and it was frustrating, because it wasn't like I was just coming at them with a random idea and I hadn't done any research. I'd gone through a massive process with them. The global team liked it. The managing director of the UK branch liked it, and it was, it wasn't like I just suddenly decided one day I was going to ask for this. It had been approved.
Yeah.
So that really upset me. That was like a probably the second most like painful, horrible experience that I've been through. And that was the second. That was awful. And I honestly, like, I can take a lot of rejection, and that was just awful. So I think maybe because I kind of, not wanting to prove them wrong, not at all, but because I maybe had that a bit of fire in me from that, I then was like, okay, I need to just do this. Previously, the reason why I didn't want to do it myself, because the manufacturing just was not there. But I just thought, okay, I've got to just make this work. And then I just did. So
That
yeah.
is so. I have to put an explicit warning. I don't usually swear, but that was that. Like, what, you know what I hate as well about that is because I think it's because of your age. That's genuinely what I think, and
I agree with you. I agree with you.
I'm not,
I agree.
or maybe I hate to say this, but maybe because you're a female, I don't know, or like both of those
Yeah.
contributing factors, which is so stupid. Like, it really, really grinds my gears when, like, because this whole podcast, I created it because I know for a fact that young people, like, some of their views don't get taken seriously, or some of like their hard work doesn't get taken seriously. When in actual fact, I think like now is the best time for young people to be entrepreneurs, because like they can create things like of so much value that previous generations weren't able to do. And you're like a prime example of that. Everyone on my podcast is a prime example of that. So that's why that really, really annoys me when people, like, especially words like, what did they say again? They used adorable. That's an awful word.
I know. And that's exactly what I thought. I thought it was a mixture of my age, and also that's exactly what I thought, also being female. And then because it actually annoyed, I think that's the thing as well. That's why it probably hurts so much, because if it was just general rejection, I'm used to it. But because I felt I'd been rejected for that reason, it upset me so much. But it it's frustrating, and I suppose the only thing that you can actually do to try and prevent it is to speak about it. So I did actually try and turn it into a positive. I actually then spoke about it on Women's Hour. So I kind of then, when I spoke about it, it kind of made me feel a little bit better, because other females came up to me and was like, I've had a similar situation, whether it be in business or in the workplace. But yeah, the fact that I basically could have lost out on a deal because of my age or my gender is just, it's just horrible.
That's awful. It's absolutely awful. I hate when stuff like that happens. Like sexism, ageism, racism, like all of those things. I fucking hate it so much. Like, obviously we've spoken about stuff like that before on the podcast, and we've spoken about racism as well in business and stuff. And I hate it so much. I really do. And like I don't want you to say the name of the company in case you get in trouble, but for like a large company to say that as well, I think is really terrible. But yeah, I mean, like, what can you do? That those sort of things exist, I guess, and we just have to kind of fight against it.
Yeah, I mean the managing director, she was lovely, and she's still really nice, and yeah, she follows my journey. It was their like marketing department or something, that their global marketing department, that made a decision. But it had already been approved by people in the company, so that it felt that was the reason why, because of my age and my gender. But it's frustrating because you can't do anything about it. That's what's frustrating.
Yeah, I know.
Well, other than talk about it and obviously create awareness, then obviously hopefully all of this will change. And I think in terms of just any discrimination, we're definitely in 2020 on the way to fixing it. And the more people that talk about it on podcasts and just in general, the more that it's going to be known and the less it's going to happen. So I suppose any experience, if you can turn it into a positive and then talk about it, then I suppose it's a good thing.
But yeah, as like a founder of color myself, like we've spoken about this sort of thing on the podcast all the time, and like there's been a lot of episodes like that. But I don't want to just focus on that because I know that we could go down this rabbit hole. I know like we're both equally as enraged as this sort of thing. But
Yeah.
let's just, for the last sort of like 5 minutes or so, I really want to talk about. So how did you actually get into retail in the end? So was it just because so that deal fell through, but you obviously had the branding and everything. How did that whole thing happen in the end? Was it literally just emailing, finding contacts, all of that stuff?
Yeah, that is 100% what it is. I changed the name and the branding so that it would stand out more, and also when it's personable, I just think it's nice for consumers because they often that they feel more connected with you and the person behind the brand. So that's why I obviously changed everything and it just looked brilliant. So went into retail. Um, I already had some knowledge because I'd gone into it before, I'd looked into it before. But yeah, it's literally a case of finding out who the buyer is, and then whether you guess their contact numbers or whether literally go into, I don't know, the shop or the retail, and literally find them and just get their contact details, email them. You probably won't get a reply. Keep on emailing them. You might get a reply, and then eventually you will get a reply. I think with anything to do with like contacting people when they have so many people contact them, the number one rule is to never contact them on a Monday, because buyers have so much responsibility and they do deal with all their budgets on Mondays and things. So any other day of the week, and also make your proposal as unique as possible. So find facts and figures about why your product's unique, and anything that you can do to stand out in that email will really really help you. So yeah, it's a case of just find out who they are, going in, finding them, speaking to them, and then constantly emailing, constantly chasing up, and then eventually it's definitely hard. It's harder than selling online or cafes. But if you've got good sales figures, and you've got something unique, and you've got something that they want, they're always looking for something new. So you will get there. You just have to really, really, really hustle with them, with buyers in general.
So it was just the whole process of just emailing as many supermarkets as possible with your sort of proposition, with your numbers, all of that stuff, just relentlessly until someone replied.
Yeah, 100%. And this is why it's good to, this is why it's good to have a plan, because if I'm coming up to that stage where I want to do that, you're not just reliant on people getting back to you, just buyers getting back to you. You've got, you're selling in online, or you're selling in cafes or something like that, because people don't get back to you straight away. You've just generally got to just really, really follow up all the time, and then eventually you will hear something. But it is definitely a case of just hustling and just constantly going at it. It's just that's really the only way to do it. There are some fairs called. There's one for food and drink, which is in Olympia, which is a fine food fair, and then you can basically have a stand there, and then you have your product obviously there. You have a stand, you have your branding, and then buyers can come round and have a look, and you can speak to them face to face. So I suppose that's definitely an advantage. So yeah, that's another way. But the most common way and the most normal way, and the way that everyone else does it is generally just by contacting, emailing, and just chasing.
Yeah. Sophie, I'd love to talk to you more because there's so many other things I would love to talk to you about. And I know, like before we started recording, we wanted to talk about mindset and uncertainty, and
Yeah.
we kind of but like we've kind of run out of time, and I think the conversation was really, really valuable. And I know a lot of people would take a lot of value from your journey, and I'm just excited to see when when it's going to be in the supermarket, so I can basically buy it.
Oh, thank you. I'm really excited for that. For me, that's going to be a massive moment. So I just can't wait for that as well.
Yeah, I think that's a huge milestone for you and your business. So massive like credit to where you like what you've done. So, and also we've totally forgot to mention like you pitched in front of like Peter Jones and two kids. Like we've forgotten so many things, but I think we just got distracted. But it's good. Should probably invite you back for a second podcast if people want that sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely. That'd be nice.
Okay, cool. So we're going to wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Sophie, for coming on the podcast. How can people kind of stay in touch with you, stay in touch with your brand in the future?
Stay in touch with me and my brand. I have an Instagram account which is at Sophie's Ice Nut Blend, and then my kind of personal one which is at Sophie Taylor Entrepreneur, and then the website is www.sophiesicenutblend.com, and all my socials are linked on there as well.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Sophie, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Millennial Entrepreneur. I had an absolute pleasure talking with Sophie today, and if you also found it valuable, follow her business as well. DM her if you like, show her, we all appreciated that she came on the podcast, show her a lot of love. And yeah, I hope to see you in the next episode. Follow us on Instagram as well to make sure you don't miss future episodes. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.